The trouble, desegregation, mass participation, unification, do things gradually, will bring more tragedy. Why don't you see it? Why don't you feel it? I don't know. You don't have to live next to me. Just give me my equality. Everybody knows about Alabama. Everybody knows about Mississippi. Everybody knows about Mississippi. That's it.
Hi everyone, I'm Anne and Tanya, and we want to bring you Purple Coach Conversation. So our uniqueness is that we're both mothers, coaches, and entrepreneurs. We've created Purple Coach Conversation, so give people a platform to talk about issues around race, diversity, and everything else that surrounds this topic. Today's topic, we're going to be looking at parenting and what it means to be a parent in this day and age, and specifically talking about race to your children. Or perhaps instead of race, I should be saying talking about color and other issues that children would be curious about, and how to respond to questions and so on. So we're going to kick it off with Tanya. Tanya, would you like to tell us a little bit more about color blindness, which is, I think, something that is, lack of a better word, perhaps encouraged sometimes within the white community?
Yes, thank you, Anne. So I am a mother of 3 very young children. I have twins that are turning 3 very soon, and I have a 4-year-old. So it's still in my mind, you know, a topic that will have to come up in the conversation. My husband is Pakistani and I am white, and so he's brown and I'm white. And I know that at some point I will have to have conversations about color with my children. But before we dive into that aspect, I was born in a very privileged background in Monaco, where there was very little diversity. However, my parents are not from there originally, and we've traveled a lot, and we've fostered children during the summer as well that looked differently than us. And I felt from a very young age that whilst we accepted and we were inclusive with different looking and different colors of skin, it was always a little bit of a taboo to mention it. And one of the person my mother was very close to married a black man and had a child that was very, very white, and just the hair was afro, but everything else was white, like his own mother. And I remember that it was a topic, you know, that we wouldn't talk about very openly, and she would even prepare people that would meet his father for the first time by saying, you know, he's darker than us, but you know, we can't really talk about it. And it was kind of seen as a difference, a hush difference that we couldn't say. So I find that, you know, with everything that's happened, and the realization that actually keeping in silence those differences was not the right thing to do, because children from a very young age, they can see it, and they can really feel very early on that, you know, it's okay or not okay to talk about it. And you know, like that's kind of how we started the conversation together. I very often said, okay, so you're black, I'm white, and I want to have a conversation, and how should we do it? And yes. I wasn't taught that until the recent event of George Floyd, where I educated and kind of learned about it. And so this concept of color blindness is a concept that needs to change, and it shouldn't be a concept that we teach our children. We need to tell them that there are differences in this world, and we are all different, but at the same time we're also all the same. We might look different, but we are all humans, and it's that concept, that baggage of understanding that we need as parents to be sharing to our kids. And it's very new. I had no idea that we had to do that up until very, very recently. I'm not saying I'm perfect and that's, you know, the best way to do it, but this is what we're having this conversation as parents.
Yeah, and it's really important. You know, you touched on the topic of how, you know, the whole concept of color blindness. And you know, from my experience anyway, as a Black woman with Black children, my daughter, who is 6 years old, even previous to her being 6, I think it started when she was about 4, would have questions about, you know, Mommy, why is my skin color, you know, this color? And why is other people's skin color this color? And so again, it's something that, and I'm sure it happens in, you know, other communities as well, not just the Black community, but these questions that children come up with about why am I different from my friend or from family members, or, you know, and so on. So, you know, just to give you a bit of a story, which is, it makes me chuckle. So my daughter's school, they're learning about Black History Month, and they're learning about all these Black, they call them heroes, which I love, by the way, like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, and so on. And so she had this book with the pictures of these Black superheroes. And I was trying to explain to her to understand why the emphasis on them being Black and what that means. And so then we came into the conversation about how we are also Black. And bless her, she was just like, but Mommy, I'm not Black. And I said, well, yes, we are considered Black people. And she goes, no, I'm not Black. And she goes, Grandma is Black, so my mom is darker skin tone than I do, and my sister as well. And she goes, and Auntie is Black. I'm brown and you're orange. So, you know, is that still that innocence that children have, where when we talk about color and diversity, is more like, okay, this is the color that I see, as opposed to the group of people. And so I had to get to a conversation with her about, okay, it's not necessarily about the skin tone. Black people come in various skin tones, but we're still considered as Black people. And there's white people. It's not to say that they're physically actually color white. It's just a term that's used. And then there's brown people, and so on and so on. I have to say, Tanya, it was really challenging. I'm not sure she's completely, fully got it yet. It's still a work in progress. But I think what's important is that if she has those questions, she knows she can come to me, she can ask, and I'll do my absolute best to answer them. Again, I don't, you know, pretend to have all the answers.
How old is she?
So she's 6 years old.
Yes.
Yeah. And, you know, talking about, so that's, you know, that's one thing as well. No matter what race you are, it's having honest conversations around color, and I think is really important, and not pretending to be colorblind, or not saying, oh, it doesn't matter, you know, stop talking about, you know, color, or that people are different. You know, yes, they are different, but we're all made the same, and we're all beautifully created. It doesn't matter what color you are. But, you know, something in that line. But the point is not shut down the conversation. Also, I think what's really important to mention, you know, Zuri's 6 years old, and we all know that children develop differently. And you have children who might be perhaps 9 years old, but not ready for that conversation, depending on where they are mentally, or their mental maturity, so to say. So just also being mindful about how you bring up that conversation, depending on the maturity of your children as well.
Yeah, but I guess for something I've learned through this journey is that it is kind of a privilege for white people to decide when they want to talk about it, because they don't necessarily get, you know, comments from other children that Black people would get very early on. So So whilst it might be a choice for white people to talk about it, for Black people, there's no choice whether they're mature enough or not to
Yes.
talk about it or not. And you are faced with questions and having to answer very big concepts like injustice
Yes.
and skin color, that it's sometimes very premature, but for their own safety, you need to already talk about it at a very, very young age, so that they might behave in a different way, and they might know what to answer. And what we're trying to say here is that we need to kind of remember that, and maybe even if we believe as white parents that it's not the right time to do it, you know, diversify our feed, have different books and
Yes.
people of color represented, make sure they watch
Yes.
cartoons, because even Paw Patrol has, you know, a diversity of people in there. And maybe,
Yes.
you know, start talking about it and be like, oh, you see, so she's Black in the, I've got this fantastic book from Lupita Nyong'o, the actress, that she wrote about this little girl who's actually darker than her own mother and her sister, and telling stories around that, which are very, they're not harsh, and they're not a big concepts, but they're big concepts in their own way, but they start with examples and beautiful images and explaining and understanding. And maybe, you know, there's not a lot of dolls that are Black, but there are companies that do produce them, and we can find them. And just you know, having this as an intention to make sure that they see diversity, and they see it as being as normal as their own skin color. Because
Yes.
there's another question I wanted to ask you,
Yeah.
is that, you know, I you know, what if my son, who he's half Pakistani, but you know, he looks more white than he does look Pakistani, but let's say, what if my son one day is in a playground and says, and sees somebody very, very dark compared to him, and he says, oh my God, he's very, very Black. Do you have any, you know, how do you think a white mother should respond to that comment?
Sure. And that's a really good question. Just before I answer that, Tanya, it's funny you brought that up, because just the other day, I had a friend of mine who is Asian, and she had her son point out to someone who was very dark skinned and went, oh, mommy, look, he's really, 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 really Black. And the mom's response was, he said, oh my God, I wanted to, you know, hide my head in the sand. And because she felt obviously really embarrassed about it. But I think it was quite interesting that she felt embarrassed about it, because, you know, if we switch it and the boy said, mommy, look, he's really, really, really white. I challenge that she would not have felt the same amount of shame. The question is, why did she feel the shame, like being Black was a bad thing? You know, you attach shame to when your child is saying something bad, right? Not something normal. And this again is the kind of stigma that I think is important that we speak to our children about. So, you know, going back to your question, what would you say to a child who says something in you know, that way, or, you know, about Black people or brown people, or something that's not normal to them, you know? I think it's just about, you know, yes, they are Black, and there's nothing wrong with it, because people, again, are created in different skin tones, and that's their beauty, and that's the way they are created, you know? And I don't think, you know, there's a personally, I think, especially with children when they're quite young, there's a balance to be had about making a very big deal out of it. Because if you make a very big deal out of it, it makes the child almost wary to ask other questions around race or color, you know, just as you would, because I guess they're also doing it in a very innocent way. It's not like they're
Yeah.
doing it because they think it's offensive or anything. So, you know, approach it with the same kind of calm manner and just explain, yes, they are, you know, this color and that color, and that's completely fine. It's, you know, God made us all beautiful in our own unique ways.
Wow, that's so powerful. And you see, I mean, if we hadn't had necessarily this conversation, I wouldn't have thought about it in this way. And if I hadn't read about especially that questioning about color blindness and putting that in question. I wouldn't have thought about it, and it's just to tell our audience that I wasn't at that place a few months ago. Before George Floyd, I thought I would have been your friend, feeling ashamed. I think that now I will still feel a bit of shame because I would be scared to hurt the feelings of the person. However, I would say what you're suggesting, and there's this other book that's very good that we will put on the references, which is about differences, and you have people of different color, person on a wheelchair. It's all drawn, and it's talk about differences. I think it's the title of the book. And I think the moral of the story at the end is to remind the child that that person may be different to you, but to that person you are different to them. And
exactly.
it's this concept of saying, and that's something I've already told my eldest, who's 4 years old, because once he's asked me, he saw somebody who had a big glasses, and he had I don't know, a mimic in his face, that he was making a movement on his face. I think it was a nervous movement, and he asked me, and I said, he's might be different to you, but you are different to him as well.
Yeah.
And it is not, but we are all the same, but because
Exactly.
we're all humans, we're all individuals, we're all human beings. And that was a bit the difficult thing to understand, but I do believe that if you start the conversation as soon as they're able to talk around these topics at the level of their maturity, obviously, but it has to start as soon as, because our goal is to make sure that when the alarm bell of injustice or racism or condescending comment around the way that somebody else looks, etc., especially when it comes to, now we are focusing on the Black community right now, but so that they know that something's wrong and I should maybe say something about it. It is our responsibility as parents to do that.
Yes.
And the only
Exactly.
way, the only way to do it is to talk about it and have conversations with them. And I'd be so curious to hear from our listeners who have older kids as well, how the recent events of George Floyd, and how the protests and what were the questions of their children and how they answered it, and what was useful to them.
Yeah, and also, just on this topic, I think it's really important that it really winds me up, and I know it's not done intentionally, but this concept that Black is bad, and what I mean by that is like the being Black is somehow somehow worse off, or it's a bad thing. So you get people kind of tiptoeing around the word Black, or you get people, I've found this more from, to be very honest, non-Black people who are not sure, should I use the word Black? Is it offensive? No, it's not offensive. And stigmatize it as being offensive. So even, back to the example of my friend whose son was going, he's really, really Black, and she felt ashamed. But she wouldn't have felt the same amount of shame, I'm sure, if he said he's really, really white. Maybe he felt ashamed, but because it's not good to point in the mannerism. It's the word Black that seems to carry a tonation that is almost like, oh, it's bad. It's a bad thing to be Black, so you don't want to call people Black, or you don't want to refer to people as Black. And I think we need to start teaching our children, both non-Black and non-Black children, that being Black is not a bad thing, or the word Black is not a bad thing, and I say all our children, because I'll give you an example again with my daughter, where she, I mentioned she's doing the Black History Month in school, and so I was trying to explain to her about being Black, and she goes, "Mommy, I don't want to be Black." And I go, why is that? And she goes, because if you're Black, people will treat you badly, and they won't treat you fair, and that's why I don't want to be Black. and it was just like,
Wow, that must be hard.
6, yeah, how
I can't
6 years
imagine.
old, she's figured out that, I don't want to be Black because people don't treat Black people the same way. And that was heavy. I couldn't even lie about it and be like, oh no, that was in the past. It's still happening. And that's why we're having these conversations to begin with.
And
Um,
I think in the next episode we're gonna talk more about because it is so much to talk about, and we're going to talk more about the privilege and how parents should talk to their children about privilege. And we want to keep this platform open on our website and on Facebook. If you have any comments and suggestions and things you want to bring up, we would love to hear from you. And make sure that you share this podcast. Well, it's not a podcast, but this episode with anybody you believe will be interested and might benefit from it.
yes.
Thank you so much for joining us again.
Yeah. Thank you, guys, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. So this is part 1 of part 2 on the parenting. So watch out very shortly for the part 2 in our parenting series.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.